Hey everybody, this is Theoretical Bullshit once again. I think I'm going to have to divide this one into two parts because it's kind of long. And actually, I think this is one of the first times I think I'm actually going to be reading a little bit. Because last night I was laying in bed. I have a laptop, so I can pretty much take my computer anywhere and just type. And I was laying in bed and I started thinking, and I started typing out my thoughts. And at first it just started out as, nothing coherent, just sort of word vomit, But eventually it became, I think, tangible enough to sort of, formulate kind of conclusions. And as I was reading what I was writing, I was going, oh, this is kind of cool. Like I could definitely post this. So consider this part one. I suppose I don't know where I'm gonna divide this up or what, but so I was thinking about. There's this exchange that I've seen a lot between Christians and atheists, and you see it a lot, like in debate circles. You've probably seen it on YouTube, but it goes like this. I know you've probably either been a participant of it or you've seen it, but it goes something like this. Christian says, anything in nature which exists must have had a cause. God is that cause. And the atheist says, well, yeah, but then God has to have a cause as well. And the Christian says, no, you weren't paying attention. I said anything in nature. God is obviously beyond the realm of nature, or outside of nature, or what have you. And I want to talk about that because I think, and I don't think this is a semantics game too much. I think it's more conceptually true. But the assumption that we are natural and God is somehow not natural or supernatural, that's a false assumption. The more original and unaltered a state of existence is, the more natural it is. And we have to remember that according to Christian theology, God existed first. God existed infinitely before anything else did. In a Christian worldview, we're the ones that are supposedly, planned and contrived and manufactured and made up, and thus we are unnatural, according to a Christian worldview. God would be natural and we would be unnatural. Okay, so given that, I think while the Christian may try to argue that, and I think this is questionable, the Christian may try to argue that God transcends matters such as time, space, cause and effect, even logic, which I think is absurd. You can try to argue all those things, but you cannot make the claim that God transcends existence itself. Clearly, to posit something outside of existence is to conclude that it doesn't exist. I mean, if God is purported to exist, then he's a part of existence and thus subject to its inherent preconditions. For example, we can conclude that God has no choice over the matter of his own existence. And you're like, whoa, what the heck? Listen. That was so mean. I'm like, listen. Okay, God has no choice over the matter of his own existence. Since God is assumed to have always existed and never not existed, there was no point at which God could decide to convert from nothing into something. And in any case, nothing isn't capable of making a choice, since choices are the product of something that already exists to begin with anyway. So here we have this really specific, emotionally intricate entity who exists against its own will, or at the very least independently of its own will. And I want to call it an entity for now. I mean, I think, and I've touched on this I think in previous posts, but I don't like using the word God when we're talking about God before creating anything else, because the word God becomes meaningless. When you are all that exists, when you are the mean, median, and mode of all that is, you are impeccably and unequivocally average. You are, you're not a God of anything at all. And so I think it's funny that we refer to God as God before anything else was created. You would have to, I mean, if you're all that there is, you would literally have to create something that is less than you and designed that thing to worship you for you to really be a god of anything at all. So I'm straying away from using the word God when we're talking about that kind of thing. I mean, I'll use it as a name, but not as a description of this entity. So here's this thing. It's existing, and the fact that something exists at all, rather than nothing, that's an arresting concept. And the Christian has no better of an account for that than the atheist does. The only difference is that the Christian believes in that a couple more things exist, or at least mostly one more thing exists than the atheist. But neither of them have an answer for the question of existence, why something exists versus nothing existing at all. The Christian asserts that God accounts for the existence of the universe. Okay? Matter, energy, space, time, consciousness, what have you. And they can even argue, or try to argue that as opposed to the universe, God exists uncaused insofar that he is eternal and at no point actually began. But given that, like I said, reality could just as easily be, in fact, that nothing exists at all, the Christian has not and cannot account for why God, a specific personal thinking, feeling, potent entity, would exist for no reason, with no cause at all. And the reason I say for no reason with no cause is because to suppose that there is a reason or a cause is to suppose that something else capable of dictating reason or initiating cause would have had to exist before and or independently of God, which, is obviously not the case according to the Christian. So here we are. We've got the Christian and we've got the atheist, and when it comes to the question of existence, this is clearly an equal playing field. While the atheist or naturalist or secularist or whatever you want to call him has to kind of concede a sort of scientific agnosticism about the origin of the universe, if any. And the reason I say if any is because there are even like Big Bang models that suggest that this Big Bang was caused by the implosion and explosion of a previous bang, which was caused by a previous bang, and so on and so forth. And so that would mean that matter and energy have actually existed infinitely into the past. So yes, while anyway, back to the point. While the atheist kind of has to say, we don't know the answers yet. We're working on that. Actually, the Christian doesn't know the answers either, but they, the whole point is that they pretend to or claim to. Anyway, while the atheist has to sort of be an agnostic when it comes to the origins of the universe, the Christian believes that the most natural and default state of existence, that like the inherent and undisturbed complexion of what is that this certain entity, complete with a plethora of specific, complex, intricate thoughts, opinions, emotions, and attributes, just is, and that reality is such for no possible reason with no possible cause, and as such, the Christian has to concede that God's existence, and further, more than God's existence, God's character, are completely and indisputably random. I'm going to repeat that. The Christian is forced into a position of having to conclude that God's existence and God's character are completely random, unselected, unmerited, unchosen, uncaused. This the theist believes is a more reasonable assumption about the nature of existence than that of a secular, naturalistic, gradual evolution from basic non-personal elements up to more, complex entities. In other words, the Christian is absolutely fucking crazy in terms of what they believe is a realistic assumption about the original state of existence.